Howdy everybody, it's Amy here from Amy's Sparkly Diamond Painting, and if you can tell from what's in front of me, this is not an unboxing or a PR package or anything like that. It's also not diamond painting. This is a video I've had requested from several people, so I thought I'd give it a try, and this is a little bit of an experiment. So I've never done a tutorial type video like this, but we're going to see if this works. So I've got some stuff in front of me. I've been working on a particular kit that I did an unboxing for just in this past week, and I wanted to see how it worked up. And as I was working on it, I thought, you know, this one really would be a good tutorial type cross stitch to show how to do confetti in different ways and the different ways that I work on these stamp cross stitches that are a little bit more complicated. So that's what we're going to try to do today. So I do have just a few things in front of me. I'm not really going to go into all the details. I don't use hoops when I use stamped, but I do use hoops when I do counted, because the stamped, the ink on here makes the fabric much stiffer so that you don't need a hoop. But if you are working on counted cross stitch, the fabric is softer and much more flexible, and you do need a hoop typically to keep your threads straight on the back. So I also have my scissors. These came from our most recent trip. So I have those. And then this little case, my hubby gave this to me. It's a little zipper case, just like the diamond painting bottle cases that we get. Of course, no bottles in there, but he got this when he bought an RC car part, and it came in this cute little case. So he said, here, you want this? So I cleaned it up and used it for all my cross stitch supplies that were scattered all over my little table where I work. So this is all needles of various types up here. This is beeswax. This is a mini tape measure. You've seen that on my channel several times, and some snips and a seam ripper. And I do have, I should have probably grabbed a better one, but I do have a couple of really cheap needle threaders. I do have a better one in my collection, but we'll go ahead and pull one of those out in case we need it. So that's just my little case of goodies that keeps everything all nice and secure with the zipper. So what do we have here? I did an unboxing of this one, and this is a gnome on a turtle, and I'm going to put a better picture on here in a minute, because this was the biggest, well, no, there was a little bit bigger one on the pattern here, but still not quite to the detail that I wanted to show in a couple spots on this video. So here we have this little gnome. He's got lots of white here on his beard. We have a sea turtle that he's sitting on, and then his hat here has all these little sea creatures on. These are supposed to be, it's a little bit harder to tell, that's why I need to pop up another picture, but these are different types of shells on here. We have a couple starfish and some coral and other little details there on the hat, and then we've got some hair or seaweed, I guess, flowing there off the back. So this is the picture, but as you know, this is a Sjtwxgirl brand, and as you may have seen from my channel, these more budget-friendly kits don't always work out quite the same way that the better brands do. So when I say better brands, I have an example here. Here it is. Better brands would be like Joy Sunday here, or Spring brand, or Fairy brand, KS cross stitch. A lot of those, even Mona Lisa, they have a lot more detail, and these are made for cross stitch, so there's a lot of more like hand rendering, and the canvases are just a little bit better quality, a little bit better printing, and in the end the design looks a lot more like exactly like what they show in the picture. Now I just made it upside down. So it'll look exactly like that, because this is a cross stitch image. Whereas these budget friendly ones, they show really neat pictures on the website, but when you get them, you find there's really not much detail. They're a lot smaller. It's more like when you buy a budget-friendly diamond painting where you see the really pretty picture, but then what you get isn't quite the same. But it's a little easier to deal with when you're dealing with cross stitch because we have the beauty of back stitch that we can do. So even though these kits don't show back stitch, for example, here is, I'm going to show this on this side because I'm going to pop up a better picture on this side. So here is the conch, or not conch, this is a scallop shell, and it looks like a green blob next to an off-white blob there. And here we have some coral, and here we have a couple more shells, and those shells are going to kind of work their way down, and we're starting to see the starfish here. So I'm going to pop up the picture here of the original as it looked on the website. So there's not hope lost on this one because I can make this shell show up more detailed by using back stitches when I'm done. If you've ever looked at a regular cross stitch kit like counted cross stitch kit or pattern before you put the back stitching in, it actually looks a lot like this. You just don't see the detail. It's the back stitch that really helps make those details come out. So I can actually do this with this one. I can add my own back stitch. I'm not going to follow a pattern because there isn't one for back stitch, but I can make out enough of the shapes that I can put little lines on the scallop shell. I can outline it. Same with the starfish. I can outline him. The coral, I'm not as sure. I might just outline where those off-white stitches are. And this is a swirl shell, so I can add a few lines going, you know, following the curves of the colors there to make that show up a little bit better. So that's my ideas for this, but I wanted to show how one of these works up. And that's why I started this one. And then I thought, you know, this really is a good one to talk about confetti, because as you can see, this is what I would definitely call confetti. There are color changes everywhere on this, and that's another characteristic of these computer-generated budget-friendly ones, is they do often have quite a bit of confetti. And you may open this and say, I don't even know where to start. I don't know how to deal with that. I don't want to switch all those colors, and you just give up on it. So I wanted to go through the entire process of finishing one of these to show that it could be done. And since this was a turtle and a gnome, that's the one I picked. So let's see, what did I want to talk about here in the intro some more? So what I'm going to show, that's probably where I should start. So here's all our colors. I'll move those out of the way. We don't even need this. This is all the off-white background that I'm not going to use, at least at this point. So I do have one of those skeins here because there is some off-white color in the gnome. So what I did here to start, I was trying various techniques, and there are different techniques that you can do for confetti stitching. So I'm going to demonstrate a few of those ways on this canvas in different areas, and we can talk about them and the differences and how I do these. So I'll show the back first on this section. Here's how it looks. It's very messy. You'll see I was stringing across several stitches here on the back, but then as I was working later stitches, it kind of went over the top of some of those and helped secure them. But this is not normal counted cross stitch stuff that I'm going to show you here. This is what I do on these stamped cross stitch kits. It would translate over to Ida cloth, definitely not linen on counted cross stitch, because those threads would show through. But this is pretty thick enough that it's not going to show these, so I didn't worry about the back. I've also done some stuff down here, and I was going to use this an example of showing working confetti, just moving from one stitch to another all over the design. Maybe if you like to do it color by color or an area by an area. So this is kind of this whole swirl here. I thought I'd do it kind of as one deal where I start a thread and I just jump all the way across to the top until that thread runs out. So that's why you see here these long stretches. These will get covered up with more stitches as I work on more of this and help secure them. But one of the things I wanted to show is like I did here. This was a really long stretch from there to there. So instead of stopping the thread and restarting it, what I did was secure it a couple times within the threads of the Ida cloth. So that doesn't show on the front. It's only through some of the stitches there from the Ida cloth on the back. So that's one of the ways that you can make really long stretches or jumps without leaving a lot of thread hanging. Because again, I don't use a hoop. This is where a hoop would be useful to keep the tension of the stitches back here. I just do it very carefully, making sure it's flat as I move from one to the other and kind of feeling on the back. So this is one technique here that I'm going to do a little bit more of this section for you on camera and show you how I do that. The way I did the top was a little bit different. This one I was going to try what they call the typewriter method, but I found pretty quickly I didn't like that on this one. So the typewriter method, well, I'll show you the details, but you basically take your first row, first stitch, fill your thread, fill your needle with that thread, stitch that stitch, and then keep going until your thread runs out, finding all of them. Going across, and then the next row, that's why it's a typewriter method. And then to pick your next color, you pick the next color that's in the stitch right next to that one, and then you can kind of move all around and use up that thread, and then the next one, and you get the idea. But it gives you a way to know what color to do next, help you decide what color you want to work on next. You just go systematically one color to the next across a row. And I didn't find that this particular pattern worked that well with that method. I have another counter cross stitch I've been using that method, and I like it much better because the design is more horizontal. It's got sky, then land, then ocean, and the whole design seems more horizontal, so it seemed to work a bit better. But that's called the typewriter method, and it's more about how to choose what color to do next, not forcing you to do each stitch in order, because once you pick your color and fill your needle, you use that thread moving all around until it's used up. So that's a typewriter method. What I ended up doing here was something similar to parking, but without the parking part, and I'll talk about that. You see no threads hanging, so this part was not done with parking. I started here. I was looking at these squares. So each square on the grid is 10 stitches by 10 stitches. So I looked at this whole row of 10 by 10 squares. So each of these squares is 100 stitches. And what I did was I started at this end, and I picked the colors that there were more of, and I started with a few of those, but I kept everything confined to that row of 10 by 10 squares. So you'll see at times I did sneak down below kind of on the edge if there were just a couple colors left. But basically I went left to right, filling in all the stitches in the squares. And that's why you see all the traveling here on the back. I would fill up a needle with the color in this first square, and I would confine myself to that top row of squares. It's kind of like diamond painting with these confetti ones. If you don't section off your diamond painting, you're looking all over the place, you're wandering all over, you're trying to fill in all those different spots. So this kind of worked the same way for my diamond painting experience, is that I just confined myself across to this row of 10 by 10 squares, and I just kept going left to right horizontally with each color. So as I put like that off-white color in, I would just kind of go left to right and fill in all those till I ran out. And then if I needed another thread to keep going, I'd do that, and I'd make sure that I got all of them in that horizontal row. And so you can see, other than a few symbols out here at this end, that entire row of 10 by 10 squares is done. And I found that to be the easiest method on this one. But then I got down here and I thought, you know, I want to just go ahead and do this. So that's when I went to this method, where I was just starting here at the tip. I was picking a color and just working that color all the way around till I ran out of thread, usually right about here in this area. So there's not much stitched over here because I was running out of thread usually around here. So then I pick another color, do all of them kind of winding around, following the shape here of the gnome's hat. And then for the longer stretches, I would tuck a little bit of the thread underneath the Ida cloth to secure it. So that's how I did that section. But there are other ways you can do confetti as well that I thought I'd use this as an example to show. So this area will be easy. No worries there. It's just filling in pretty solid areas. That's why I was mentioning the white here is in the beard and everything, so I do need some of that. But I thought I'd take a couple of these 4x4 square sections and show you a few other techniques that you can use. One of them for confetti stitching is diagonals, where you break each section up into diagonals instead of squares and you stitch on the diagonal. Now one of the reasons you might want to do that is if you pick like a 4x4 square area and work on it, and then the one next to it, you end up with these artificial lines between the squares that can show in your stitching. Whereas if you go across that square and kind of do more like what I did up here, where I didn't necessarily stay exactly in that square. If I had a couple little colors left, I would sneak down and do them there a little bit in the next section. That's kind of called feathering, so that you don't get those straight lines showing up in your work. So I did kind of expand a little bit down, but some people really like the square by square method, and it doesn't cause them troubles, and it doesn't always show on the front. I'm not sure it would show as much on a stamped as it would on a counted. So what you can do with these 4x4 areas is either work diagonally. I actually thought the turtle head would be more appropriate to do diagonally to show you that. And then another method is called the snake method, where you start with the first square and you just work one line at a time. And that's a little bit more of a parking method that I've shown before on my other parking video, but I do apologize for that one because the first section of that video got cut off. And so it's kind of confusing because it starts in the middle. So I thought I'd show parking again in one of these other square sections. And basically what parking is you start at the top corner, you pick a color, you work that color for your little section, maybe a one square, 2, 4, I would keep it pretty small. And then you pull the needle to the front like you're going to do the next stitch of that color, and you just take the needle off and leave that thread sitting there until you get to that section. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I'll talk about each of those techniques as I do them and go into details on why you might want to do one over doing another one and why I do the weird things I do. But I do things a little bit different on these stamp cross stitch because this is pretty thick Ida, so what's going on in the back is not going to show through the same way. And some people even tie knots for these stamped cross stitch. It's your project. If you want to tie knots, that's perfectly fine. I've spent way too many years being told over and over no knots because of the linen and other things that counted cross stitch uses. The fabric will pucker up because it's not quite as stiff, and you will see the knots when you go to frame it. If you're going to flat frame, it'll create bumps on the front, but for something like this, I think it would make a good pillow, so I'm not worried about the back. I still haven't tied knots though. I still have my own personal trouble with doing knots on cross stitch, but it's your project. If you want to do knots, that's perfectly fine if it works for you. So, oh boy, here's another good example. It's white thread, so it's hard to see, but this is, I wasn't even following the hat here. I was trying to go along the edge. I noticed that there's a symbol here. It's this V color that's almost white, which also tells me this was computer generated. So I was working those V's, which took me here. You can't tell on the back, but it took me all along. I started here and I worked the spiral, and it took me all along the edges to do those V's, and that's why you see this weird stretch here. That's what was going on there, is that color was just going all the way around the border, and you can see I'm just stretching the thread across. This was white on white Ida, so it wasn't going to show anyway. I wasn't too worried about it. So I guess overall what I want to say is don't get too tied up in the rules of different techniques. Do what works for you and do what seems to fit each individual project. So what I do for this one is different than what I've done for some other ones, but you probably don't want to hear as much talking. You want to see a little bit of stitching. And yes, okay, I do have a needle here. I save them in the corner. For a lot of counter cross stitchers, depending on where you live, sticking a needle in the fabric is not a good idea because they can rust and leave brown spots on your fabric, especially if it's a needle you've been using a long time that you like. I had rust spots all the time on my cross stitches in Houston because it's very humid. San Angelo, West Texas is pretty dry, so I haven't had any issues with leaving my needles in my projects, but if you do leave your needle in, you probably want to put it on the edge and not anywhere within the project, just in case you do get a stain or something from the needle sitting there, and in case it leaves a mark over time if it's been in there a really long time. But that's where people use needle minders, which are a magnet, just like a cover minder for cross stitch, same thing. And let's see if I can reach one here. Not quite. My arm is just too short. I have my cover minders from diamond painting sitting over there. But it's a magnet with a neat little design on the front, and it holds your needle, and that keeps it from messing up the fabric. But I find they get in the way, and my magnets aren't that strong on mine. You need a stronger magnet for fabric than you do for diamond painting plastic. But anyway, I digress. So let's start with just the random move around confetti method. So I've got my needle here. I did get a needle threader. I tend to not use them too often. And hold on just a sec. Okay, sorry about that. The doggos saw something in the backyard that they had to go check out. So this is an 11 count, and I had some questions on how do you tell the count. We're not quite ready for stitching because there were a couple other things. I didn't take notes or anything. I'm just kind of winging this. So this is an 11 count, which means 3 strands. So that's 11 squares in 1 inch. So you can take your ruler, which I do have in here, or tape measure. If you're not sure what the count is, maybe you got rid of the packaging that your design came in, and you have it in a project bag already and you have no idea what count you have. Over time you'll learn to be able to tell just by looking at it, but if you're not sure, each of those grids is a 10 by 10 square. So you can see that 1 inch mark goes 1 square. Hopefully you can see that. It looks blurry to me, but I don't have my cheaters on, which is why. Okay, that's pretty clear. So that 1 inch mark, if I put the 0 line right on that blue line here, the 1 inch mark is 1 square beyond that. So I know that's 10 plus 1, that's an 11 count. Now that's different from, say, this one right here, which I know is a 14 count. So the squares are quite a bit smaller here. So if I put my ruler up, I know this is pretty basic stuff here, but if I put my ruler on the line there, you can see that the 1 inch mark is 4 beyond that 10 by 10 square. So that's a 14 count. A little bit smaller squares, a little bit harder to see. 14 count uses 2 threads per square. 11 count, 3 threads typically. And then if your eyesight is really good, which mine is not, but this set of animals was really cute, you can sometimes find 18 count in stamped. Sorry about the packaging there. Probably should have pulled this out ahead of time. Okay, hopefully I can edit out some of that noise. This is an 18 count, and it does say 18. Usually they will say somewhere on them, but There's my 1-inch mark. You can see it almost fills 2 squares there. So 18 count also uses 2 threads, but it's really thick. So I've done just a tiny part of this one here. This is supposed to be an animal. It's a little dragon. We'll see if he comes out because he has large areas of solid color here on this side. Not a ton of confetti, but I'm not completely sure he's going to come out. His eye doesn't look very detailed there, but it's really hard to tell till you get done. And of course, the difference between cross stitch and diamond painting is that you can add your own back stitch to make those come out, as I mentioned before. But I'm just looking at this one. The print had a few issues there at the bottom. And that's why you have your pattern, so that if you do run into weirdness, you can double check things with the pattern, which I have done several times on this one just to be able to double check the symbol. I have the key on the side, but some of these symbols, once they're printed on here, are a little bit difficult to figure out, so I've been able to go back to the pattern to confirm some of those because it is a little bit more clear, especially with confetti when you end up with all these isolated stitches. Let's see if I have any like that symbol right there. There's a stitch I hadn't finished yet. It is one little spot there and kind of hard to read that symbol. Okay, we're gonna try to work around Hyperdog. It is the middle of the day on Sunday, so the dogs are a little bit restless. So, all that to say, by showing the different counts, the reason I brought that up is because I cheated a little bit on this one as well. Starting and stopping threads can be kind of tricky for some people, especially if you don't tie knots, and I like to be lazy about it. So you can probably tell this is pretty thick here. That's because I used 4 threads instead of 3. So typically 11 count would be 3 threads. But 3 threads is an odd number, and it's easier to start a thread if it's an even number because you can do the loop method. And so that's what I wanted to do with this. So much of this is actually with 4 threads till I had kind of a good number of stitches done. Then I switched to 3 threads because then I could just secure it on the back of these already done stitches. But I'm going to go ahead and show that because in this area there isn't a whole lot to secure to. So I've been doing 4 threads at this point through this part so that I can show you the loop method, and then we can also talk about a couple different methods for 3 threads. But I'm a little bit more insecure about my threads being secure, if that makes sense. So I don't do some of the techniques that are out there with pin stitching and stuff because I worry it's going to come out. And after doing all this work, I really don't want some of my stitches to come loose. I've had that happen before with crochet, and it's very frustrating when you do a whole granny square afghan using the magic loop method and then find your magic loop starting to come undone because you didn't secure the thread well enough. So all that to say, I like to make sure my thread's secure, so I don't necessarily do some of that pin stitching and stuff, but I will show you at least that technique. So let's start here. So we have this swirly area here, and I see a lot of this light pink color here. Hopefully you can see that. So we've got our first one in the swirl is right here. And then you can see they go throughout here. So let's choose that light pink color, which is right here. And this is another reason why the pattern is good to have, because the serging, the stitching to secure the edges here, sometimes go through the middle of some of the numbers and make them hard to read. So you can confirm here that that is color 931, which is kind of a dusty blue color. So it's going to look very different than that light pink. But I believe, yes. I don't have these in order on a ring yet. I wasn't sure I was going to stay with this pattern enough. I think I will, so I probably should get a ring. So I'm going to take one of these off of my floss drop, and I'm going to pull out 2 threads because, like I said, I'm going to double them up with the loop method to make 4. So I'm going to just pull out 2. And the way I like to pull out the threads is hold on and just pull one out, and it gets all bunched up, but that's okay because once you get it pulled out, the bunching up goes away. Now every once in a while you can get a knot or get it caught up, but usually that works pretty well instead of the whole untwisting, which I have more trouble with knots that way. So I just pull, 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 and voila. Now it stretches right back out, and I immediately put it back on my floss drop so that I don't lose what color that was. So I just pull out one at a time that I'm going to use and put all the rest back. So we have our 2 threads here. If we can find the ends without tying them into knots. So I'm going to put the 2 together here. Hopefully I can do all this on camera. That's the challenge of this. So even them and flatten them out. And now I'm going to fold it in half and put the 2 ends together. So I've got the 2 ends, 4 strands there doubled up with a loop on the other side. So I'm going to put the needle on where the ends are. And one of the troubles with 4 threads on a needle is it can be hard to get them through. So I'm going to trim them to make sure they're even. And the trick that I typically do, this is a bigger needle for 11 count. So I don't know if you can see that. This is an 11 count needle. So I'm going to hold my thread and I'm going to fold it around the needle eye there and pinch it, and that gives a nice edge that's all even for me to poke right through the needle there. Now if you prefer to use a needle threader and that just works easier, that works as well. So with the needle threader, go ahead and take this out and show that. You put your little hook through the eye of the needle, loop your end around that hook so that it'll stay, and then pull it back through. I'm not a big fan of needle threaders. I tend to just fold it over. So that gets it threaded as well. But now we have, it's pretty thick. But if you're doing something as like a pillow or something, you want it kind of thick to be a little bit more tapestry-like. So I got my threads uneven by showing it twice there, but that's okay. I'll just trim it again. I won't worry about it. So now we have our 4 threads. Now one of the dangers of using 4 threads is you could run out of floss, but these all have the DMC numbers. You can go to your local craft store and get the same color if you run out. I haven't run out yet on these bigger or these budget-friendly kits. They tend to give a lot of floss. Okay, so we're gonna take, again, I don't use a hoop, which means the back and the front are both accessible to me quite easily. If you use a big frame, then you have to do everything from the front because you can't really flip it back and forth. That's another reason I don't like the weight of hoops, because they can be heavy, and I don't like dealing with frames and only working from the front. So our first pink stitch is right here. So I'm going to go up. I always go bottom left as the start of each of my cross stitches. So there I'm coming up through the bottom left of that pink square, and I'm not going to pull it all the way, and then I'm going to go down top right. So my first diagonal in all my stitches goes bottom left to top right. Now I'm going to flip this, and you'll see as I pull it through, that loop is coming up here. I'm going to stick my needle through that loop and pull, and now that thread is secure. And that's why I like to use 4 threads in areas where it's difficult to tuck underneath, because I can secure it like that and not worry about it. And that's very secure as opposed to some of the other methods. So now I'm going to finish this stitch, which is another thing you want to do if you're skipping around. I was always taught in the early days of cross stitch, you work one side all the way across, and then you go back to work the other half of your stitch. But when you're dealing with confetti and a lot of my cross stitches these days. I don't do that. I complete one stitch before I move on to the next, depending on where I want to end up with my thread. So I made the first half of the stitch there. Hopefully you can see that. Zoomed in well enough. Now I'm going to pop the needle down through the bottom right hole, go into the top left there and pull it through. It's a little more awkward on camera, but that is the first stitch. And as I stitch, you'll see I'm always holding a finger on the back, which makes it tough for really big canvases. I have to kind of roll them up and squish them because I want to feel what's going on in the back, especially in the start of a long thread. You can end up with knots. And so I always like to have my finger back there because I'm feeling for if there might be a knot trying to form, which sometimes happens when it just gets all caught up in the back. And you can feel that if you keep one of your fingers on the back, which is another reason I prefer to stitch in hand. So our next stitch is very close. It's just diagonally right next to that one. So we're going to do that stitch. We're going to come up at the bottom, go diagonal. I'm going to move my scissors out of the way. I keep trying to hit the scissors and they're making noises there on the table. So there's the first diagonal there, and then bottom right, straight down, if I can do this on camera. Pull it through, and I've got my finger on the back feeling and kind of flattening and making sure that the tension is good. And then the other half of that stitch. So all my stitches, that top leg goes the same direction, bottom right to top left. And that gives it a very neat look. If you've got a lot of weird looking stitches, check the direction, but make sure that the top leg always lays the same direction. But I always work starting bottom left to top right, and then bottom right to top left. So there's 2 stitches there. Now let's look for the next one. It's pretty close. It's right up there. So I did pick a color with a lot for a reason, because they're closer together and just easier to stretch across. So that one, the other one ended here, so I'm stretching across about 4 or 5 stitches there. So bottom left, top right. Pull it through. Bottom right, top left. If I can find the hole while I'm doing this on camera. I do not do the sewing method where you do the in and the out motion in one, because it beats up on the thread a little bit more. It puts a little more friction on the thread against the holes of the fabric, and it can fray easier. So I don't do that. I find my stitches look neater if I do them one at a time, the old stabby method. So now we've got this white stitch there, and then there's the pink again. So we're gonna do that stitch next. So I'm basically just working my way around the shape of the swirl rather than worrying about the square or rows or anything like that. I'm just following along the shape of this swirl. So we'll do this one next. And I'll start going a little bit faster if I can. I might even have to time lapse on a couple of these, or stitch a little bit and then come back. And as you get more stitches in a hole, like that one, it's a little bit harder to push it through that last stitch when you have all 4 in a corner in one square area. It gets thicker and thicker, and that's the downside again of using 4 strands instead of 3, is that you're pushing 4 strands through that hole 4 different times. So it does get a little bit bulky and harder to do as you go, but I find the benefit of making the easy start in some of these areas works great. And I've been mixing 3 and 4 throughout this, and you can't tell. Okay, so there's the next stitch. I see another one down here, so I'll do, hopefully you can see that. That's right here. There's a few of them here in a little area, so I'll do all of those real quick. I do a lot of movement with my arms and the fabric while I'm stitching. Good exercise, right? Wonder how many calories you burn. If you wear a Fitbit while you're crocheting or stitching, I have a fitness ring, one of the Amazon Aura rings. If you do that while you're stitching, you'll find that your exercise goes way up because your Fitbit or your ring thinks you've done steps every time you're doing stitches. And it can really add up. So I think this is the last one of this pink for this area. So even though that color was pink, we're starting to see more of the actual true blue color coming through, especially with this darker 931 color. So we're covering up the colors that don't make sense and replacing it with the ones that are supposed to be there. So I'm looking around. I don't see any pink anywhere left. So I'm going to look, where's my next one, following along the curve of this. And this area right here has some more. So we'll do that. So our last stitch was up here. Our next one is down here. So I'm just going to pull it across and we'll look at the back, because that's about 7 or 8 stitches there. So I'm jumping across that many, and I just make sure it's not too tight, but it's nice and flat on there, and I just keep going and don't worry about the back. So I'm gonna keep stitching these pink squares, and this one, because it's 2 side by side, I'll go ahead and do the other method where you do the first half for both of those in a row and then go back and finish the second half. But I found with confetti you can lose stitches easily, so that's why I like to do the full stitch start to finish before I move on to the next one when I'm working confetti, because you can miss the second half of some of those stitches at times, buried in all the other colors and stitches. It can be harder to find them. So that's why for confetti it's easier to just do the whole stitch start to finish before you move on to the next. So we're gonna keep going here with a few more of these pink ones, and I'm gonna look for another longer stretch. And there's a pink one over here that's different from this whole section. I'm gonna complete this stitch, but it's probably closest to up here rather than me going all the way down here and jumping back. So I'm gonna finish this stitch here all the way instead of doing it the row method, and then I'm gonna jump across and go ahead and grab that one. If I can get my needle to go. It's kind of funny, it's like when you're being washed, it's much harder to do. So I'm gonna go ahead and jump across. There is a little bit of planning I do as I'm moving along, so I don't want to miss this one. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab that one and then go back to this section. So I'll get this one pink one here. And I don't think, yeah, there's another one down there. Okay, so watch what I'm gonna do here. And this is where, you know, you just kind of keep looking ahead. So I'm gonna go ahead and do the half stitch method and jump down here and grab that one. And this is where confining yourself to just a couple squares makes the confetti a little bit easier, because I could probably look down here and say, oh, there's more, I should go there. So at some point you got to stop and say, nope, go back. And don't worry about those till later. So kind of like diamond painting and why we section off small areas. So I'm just focusing here just on this little swirl area. But this one, this design just makes it easier because that's all background that I'm not going to do. So it does give me just a little area to focus on just by the nature of this design. Okay, so now I'm going to go back and work on the rest of this little section of pink ones here. And this is probably some sort of little bubble or something, because there's a whole little area of pink ones. Although it's dark, it might be background. This looks like it's going to be something, because it's all a big area of those letter V symbols. So sometimes even in the confetti, if you look where the symbols are concentrating, you can figure out, hey, there's something there. So we're going to finish this row. Hopefully you can see some of this. And now I'm gonna end this pink pretty soon because I want to show you the other techniques. I say pink, it's obviously a bluish gray color, but the pink symbol, so that we can move on to some of the other techniques. Otherwise this video is going to take forever. So what I'm gonna do, we'll have our first intro to parking because I'm gonna leave this thread hanging for another time so I can finish it later. So this is the technique that I'm doing for just kind of taking a particular part of the design and then just doing the confetti, just jumping from one stitch to the other. So that is method number 1. So I'm going to end this here, and the way you can end it without ending your thread, because there is more pink to do, I'm just going to move on to do a different part. Maybe say your kid needs something or you got to cook supper. So parking is you go to the next stitch you're going to do in that color. So there's the pink one, and I'm going to put my needle in the bottom left corner and pull up like I normally do to start a stitch, but I'm not going to finish it. I'm just going to take the needle off and leave it hanging. And now that thread is parked for when I want to go back and do more of that pink symbol later on. So you just kind of move it off to the side. There are different little plastic winders that you can use to hold your thread. You can just kind of bunch it up and use various little stitchy things, magnets and stuff, to hold it off to the side if it gets in the way, especially if you're parking with multiple colors. I'm just going to do this one over here, and that way when I go back to stitch more of this thread, I can look and I always know that I brought it in the bottom left of that symbol. So I can look at this even though I don't remember a month from now that this is color 931. What I know is it's that pink symbol, because that's where the bottom left corner is where I brought it up. So I always pick the same corner to start with, and that way you know when you're parked which stitch or which symbol that belongs to. So okay, we'll try the 5th time. The dogs are being really difficult today because it's finally sunny and warm. I can't blame them, but at the same time it's frustrating trying to do a video. So here we were finishing up this thread by talking about parking. So I parked it in the bottom left corner of this pink symbol, so I know that this color goes with that symbol. And when I want to start up again with this thread, I just put the needle on it and stitch that one and keep going with that symbol. So that's the basics of parking. But now I wanted to talk a bit about diagonals, and I thought I'd do that with an example here from a counted cross stitch. So diagonals are usually used more often with these full coverage Heaven and Earth Designs counted cross stitch. And I kind of mentioned it at the beginning of my video. By working in diagonals, it gives you something to follow, kind of a pattern to follow, but at the same time it doesn't give you all those lines that you might get by working in squares. So this is a pattern. I will try to pop up a picture here in the corner. This is a counted cross stitch that I started of a really large design. Really, really large. I don't remember the size, but this piece of fabric is gigantic. It's too hard to fit because I'm zoomed in for stitching. But this is 25 count. So I am doing 25 count, 2 threads folded in half, 1 thread folded in half to make 2. Here you can see all the 2s, but I'm doing half cross stitch on it. So by doing double the thread on this tiny count, it gives all the coverage with only doing half the work. So that's why you see a lot of people talking about tent stitch or half cross on these full coverage, because you only have to do the first half of the cross stitch, but you use double the thread you normally would. In this case, for 25 count, 2 threads is pretty thick, but that way you don't see the white behind it. Hopefully the camera can focus on that, and you can see that it covers really well with half the work, so that for a really big design you can get it done faster. But the point of this is to show working in diagonals. So that's what I'm doing here. I have the chart on software called Pattern Keeper where I can mark off the stitches, but Pattern Keeper lets you put diagonal lines. So instead of the square grid, it has a diagonal grid across it. So what you do is you take a color in the top area of your diagonal and you work that color all the way down the diagonal, and then either park it down at the bottom, or sometimes in order to keep the bulk from getting too much in the bottom, I will start at the bottom and work my way up and then park it over at the start of that next diagonal ready to go. So I know the camera's doing all sorts of focus issues on this one. So these threads are ready for this next diagonal here. Man, it's just not going to focus. So these threads are ready for this next diagonal here near the top. And these, I work down this way. That's what all these little stitches here are, the ones that were within that diagonal. And then I parked those down here, ready to go upward. So I find that working both directions in the diagonal keeps the bulk of my parked threads from getting too crazy here. And sometimes if it gets more than, say, 10 threads, I'll go ahead and either end them or work them in or do something else so that I don't have too many parked threads going at once, because they do kind of get in the way. But by doing this, I'm parking over in the next diagonal. Now I didn't draw lines on this. I will have to. So I bought my pens, and that's why I'm talking about this one, because since these stamp cross stitches already show a grid that way, it's a little bit harder to do diagonal on them because it's not marked. And this fabric isn't marked at all, but I do little dots. So what are these pens? Let's start there. These are called friction pens, and I've shown them before briefly on another video, Frixion. So these are from Pilot Brand. I got both of these at my local Walmart. So you can buy them on Amazon, but you can also probably find them at your local store, either department store or even bigger grocery stores probably. So what these pens are is that the ink is heat sensitive. So the ink turns clear if it gets too warm, and that's why it's called friction, because they have a little plastic tip at the top, and as you rub like you're erasing, that's not an eraser, but it's a little piece of plastic that as you rub, you create heat on the paper and the ink disappears. Now in the case of a cross stitch, of course it's fabric, you can just put an iron on it real quick and that'll create enough heat. So these are refillable, and it's a gel ink. So I'm going to open this. So basically what you can do, so I'll take the inside part. So what you can do is you count 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We'll just estimate. And you make a little dot on your fabric. And then the dogs are just going to be difficult. Okay, sorry about that. The neighbor got the dogs going again. So I was able to get my pen back working here. So I counted out 10 and I made a mark. And then I can go down a little bit more and count out 10 and make a mark. I'm not going to actually count out here because that'll take too long. And count out 10 and make a mark. We'll pretend like I can count. And so then I have these dots showing where the next diagonal is that I'm working on. That one definitely wasn't a straight line, but that's okay. I'm just doing this for illustration. And then these marks are heat sensitive, so you put enough heat on there and they will disappear. And also, since this is a full coverage, so the entire thing will be stitched, that means that these will be covered up anyway by other stitches. So all that to illustrate an example for diagonal. Well, you can do diagonal on these as well for confetti, but it's harder to do with these squares already drawn, so you might want to draw diagonal lines. So it's a little bit easier to see the diagonal on counted or on stamped here. So I can take this pen and I can draw a diagonal line across here. And I can go another 10 or maybe even 20. If you like bigger ones, we'll go 10. And I can draw another diagonal across here. It doesn't have to be exact. It just has to give you kind of something to follow in general, because you can move across it. Like I said, every rule is meant to be broken in cross stitch. So there I've got a few diagonals. So I would work this first section. I didn't draw a diagonal across there because there's only a few stitches that would be on the other side there, so I combine them. But I can focus on just this area and do all the stitches in this area, and then park a thread over here for when I do this diagonal and then this diagonal. So let's try that. Oh, and I didn't show that you can also get highlighter type colors if you like lighter colors, but I find the darker easier to see. So that blue V is the one I was talking about that shows up kind of bordering all around. That's an almost white color. So I believe it's not the white, but I will reach over here to use my chart and see that blue V is somewhere. There it is. So it is color 747. So we'll hunt that one down in this mess that I haven't fully organized. It's easier to do while sitting on the couch, but I knew it was a very light color, so I knew it would be easy to find. So it's a very, very, very pale blue. So I'm going to take, I've got one strand there, but I'll grab another thing here. So I'm going to do the same thing with the 4 strands, because this is, actually, maybe not. Let's use this to show an example of the other method where you can start a thread somewhat easily with 3. And this is a method I don't use very often, but I do every once in a while depending on where the single stitch or maybe just a couple stitches are. So I'm going to pull out 3 the same way I've done before, but because I'm using the full length here, I'm going to cut it in half. So if I were doing the folding, it would make this half as long and a little bit easier to deal with, but something this long is going to fray over time. Boy, my focus is just really struggling with this. So I'm going to cut this thread in half just to make it more reasonable to deal with there. So about there. Doesn't have to be exact. So we'll trim that one so that we have a shorter piece to work with for this video. And then I will put the rest back on the floss drop so it doesn't get lost or confused on what color that is later on. And I think I've already lost my needle. Nope, there we go. Okay. So we're going to thread our needle here, and again I just take a piece, I find the eye of the needle, I fold it over and pinch it, and then push the needle through that little fold. Easy, easy. So there we've got 3 strands now instead of 4. So we're going to take a look at this first diagonal here, and we see that V as one of the first stitches. So the way I secure it for pin stitch is you'll see there is in the weaving, every other stitch either has these vertical threads across the top or horizontal threads like this one next to it. So it's going to go back and forth. Let me see if I can grab those, the horizontal ones there. So it's going to interchange back and forth, vertical here at the top and then horizontal here at the top. So what I'm going to do is look at that V, that first symbol, and I see that it is a horizontal. So this one's vertical, that one's horizontal. So I'm going to push my needle through the top horizontal thread. So you can see, you can't see the needle back there. I'm just skimming across those top horizontal threads. And I'm going to pull it through till we're very close to the end here. And I see that my boss is texting me, but I'll deal with that in a little bit. And I go ahead and trim them to make sure they are really, oop, dang it. Stuff happens. I'm going to trim them. Let me pull it back so that I have a little more space there, so my scissor doesn't grab. So I'm going to pull it pretty close there, and then I'm going to trim straight across. It keeps grabbing. I think my scissors need sharpening, or there's something sticky on the end, so that it's a very even, let me roll this up in my hand, so that it's a very even edge there. And I'm going to pull it, it didn't get even. That one really stuck on my scissor. You need it even across. And I'm going to pull it until it gets right to the edge of that horizontal thread there. So you can see the little bits of thread poking out there, and that's why you want them even. You don't want to miss one of those threads and have it caught up in there where there's not enough to secure. So now I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to poke it down right through the middle of that stitch. I'm just going to poke it on down through there, and it can be harder to do with these bigger size needles because they're not very sharp, but you can get through that ink and paint. And there, I pulled it down, and that put this little tiny stitch within that square there. But when I pull, you'll see that that piece of thread is secure. It's not coming out. And then I just do my first regular stitch over that thread. So that is a way you can secure 3. It's easier to do on 11 count because the squares are bigger, as opposed to 14, and I wouldn't even try it on 18 count. But you don't need to, because 14 and 18 count, you can just do the loop method, because those typically use an even number of threads, the 2 or the 4. So now I'm just going to work all of these V stitches in this diagonal. And this is where you have to think ahead a little bit and look for maybe ways to move around. So I've got some V's over here, and then that's, oof, man, the focus is tough. So I've got these over here, and that's it until way over here. But these are closer to this one, but if I work these, then I'm way down here, and those will be hard to get. So I'm going to go ahead and grab these and then work these. So it's just a matter of thinking how much thread you're going to use and trying not to miss any in this diagonal. So you want to get all of that color that's in that diagonal all in one shot. So I'm going to go ahead and do these V's, but instead of doing, since I have no other stitches to cover up some of this, I'm going to go ahead and do the half cross and then work my way back, and that way I'll end over here, which is a little bit closer, instead of ending way over here with all the full stitches and then have to stretch longer. So it just takes a little bit of thinking about your path to work some of these. So I'm going to do the half cross here to get all 4 of these up here. And I'm glad I can finally work on the turtle part. So that's another fun thing about stamp cross stitch, is you don't have to count to get from one part of the design to the other. You can stitch on whatever you feel like. So I'm not going to stitch these over here. I'm going to focus within that diagonal. So I'm going to stop there and work my way back. Now this is a design where normally I wouldn't do this. I'm doing this just as illustration method, just to show how this method works. But typically if I were actually doing this one, because I know that the V is these white ones that go all the way, all the way around, I would probably start here, start here and just follow along all the way around on this particular design. But since I want to show you how diagonal method works, I'm doing this in this way just so you can see. So here I stitched all those V's up there in the top part of the diagonal, and I'm stopping at that line. So now I'm going to move across here, and this is a pretty big jump here. So we're going from here all the way across to here. So another method, if you're worried about the loose threads on the back is you can see where you're going to end up. And the way I usually do that is I'll poke here and then just flip it over to see. So I need to go from here to here. So what I'm going to do, the same idea with those horizontal and vertical threads, is I'm going to find a couple of those and tuck underneath them. That should be pretty close there. So I'm just on the back side. You can't see the needle on the front. I'm just on the back and I'm tucking through a couple of those, which helps secure that thread. So now it's where I want it to be without having a big long stretch of a thread there. So I'm going to bunch this up in my hand and then keep stitching on the color V within the diagonal. So those two are next to each other. I'll do the half one way and then go back. And there's only a few of this color, so I'll show you what we do when we finish that color, because we have a couple choices when we're working the diagonal. Get those done. It's really easy to get these done at first because you don't have other stitches around it to make poking in and out of those holes harder. So the more stitches you get, the little bit harder it is to pull that needle through the holes. But right now this is pretty darn easy on this one. Okay, I think there's only one more here, which leads us to then our next decision point. So lots of little decision points with cross stitch, which is why it's a little more complicated than diamond painting. But if you're looking for a distraction from work or other things and you want to think for a while, you're not thinking too much because you're not counting, but trying to figure out which way to go and what to stitch next is enough to keep your mind occupied on one of these confetti heavy ones. So I'm looking across this diagonal here. I don't see any more of that color. So now we can look at the next diagonal, because we're going to park our thread for when we're ready to stitch that next diagonal, because we still have a lot of thread left. Now the one way you could do this is just move to the next diagonal and keep going with that thread until it runs out, moving from one diagonal to the next. However, for illustration purposes, I'm not going to do that. I see our next one is way down here. So I'm going to park my thread and worry about that next diagonal when I'm ready to do it. So I ended way up here. My next stitch is way down here. That's too long, especially if I'm parking it, to leave it sit just with a long thread on the back. So I'm going to secure and work my way down there. So I'm going to maybe do one here, do another one maybe down here, and I tend to prefer to go through the horizontals. So now I've kind of secured that thread across the back, headed the direction I need to go. So again, parking, you look for the bottom left of that next one you would stitch, pull it through and pull the needle off. You're like, why would you do that on that design? This one I probably wouldn't, but that counted cross stitch makes more sense. This is just for showing you how the diagonal method works. So then I would pick this up when I'm ready to work on the next diagonal, work my way up, do all those V stitches, and then probably park it over here. You can keep going the same direction, but I tend to prefer to do more of a zigzag, and that way when I get to the bottom of a diagonal, I park at the bottom, and then I can just work my way up on the next one. So then we could take another color here. I see a lot of this red V, so we could do that red V. I didn't like grab this color because I guess I could. There's a fair amount of those too, but I try to pick the color I see the most to give me more to secure the rest of the threads to. So I see this red V, and I could do that color, work my way all the way down, and there aren't any down here, so it would end like right about there, and then I'd look for the red V at the bottom of this one and park it down there. So why don't we go ahead, just to be sure that it's clear, and we'll do that red V symbol. So that is color 3765. I believe that's another light blue. I got such a thread mess here. I believe it should be this color. And normally they're not this tied up. When I'm sitting on the couch, I find it a little bit easier to, nope, that's 3842, to keep them straight. I really do need to put them on a ring, kind of like a keychain ring or a notebook ring, where you can secure them and you can put them in DMC order, so that way you can find them much easier than what I'm trying to do here. So this is one of those, don't do this. Do something better. 3811, wait, there it is. It's darker than I thought, that's why. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my 2 folded in half for that one, but I showed you how you can do 3 and pin stitch. And then you can also, once you get enough of a little area stitch, you can secure in the back of pre-done stitches. I can show that here in a few minutes, but we're gonna take our long thread, fold it in half. So I've done a mix of 3 and 4 throughout this, and it hasn't caused me any troubles at all. So I'm going to fold, pinch, and push it through. Voila. And now we've got our parked thread here. We'll just kind of leave that off to the side, ready for the next diagonal. And this is just a more systematic way. If you don't like the random way of doing things, this is just a little bit more systematic. So there's our first V, red V symbol. So we'll do that one. So pull it through, grab the loop, and that stitch is secure. I just like that kind of a secure stitch rather than the one I just showed you before that with the 3 threads. So we will work through our color V here. Stitchy, stitchy. All the stitchies. So I'm also trying not to wonder what my boss is texting me about. I'm sure it's about the email that the entire federal workforce got from OPM over the weekend, that we had to respond with 5 bullet points of all the things we've done the last week. And on Twitter, there's a post from a certain individual that says if we don't respond, it means we've resigned. So I find that really hard to believe, especially since it wasn't in the email, but we're all getting instruction on how to deal with that. Fun way to mess up your weekend, but anyway, that's for later. I'm stitching now. So as you can see, because I have no other stitches around these, it's going pretty quick, pretty easy to go in and out of those holes, and always working with the same diagonals going the same direction, the same upper leg of the stitch going the same direction, and working each full stitch one at a time until we get to the end. And we're just about to the end of this color for this diagonal. But it gives you just a smaller area to focus on, so you're not overwhelmed by all the symbols everywhere. And that's one of the good sides of doing this, and why it's done quite a bit for counting cross stitch, full coverage type designs, because it just gives you a focus area. And because you're going diagonals, you don't have these artificial squares showing up in your stitching that it sometimes can. Okay, so this should be my last V in this diagonal. And that's why it's also good to have a way to secure your parked threads so they don't try to get caught up in your other threads. So hopefully you can see now I've come up against my diagonal line here. Now if this were really me, because you know all rules can be broken, I would just keep going and do that little section, because I think that's all. There's a couple up there, but I would just keep going with it. But since I'm trying to illustrate the true way of focusing on just one diagonal at a time, I'm looking here. I ended down here, so where's the bottom red V would be these right here. So to park it, I would pick this one right here, put the needle bottom left. So now I know that this thread goes with this symbol, because I always park bottom left and pull the needle off. And I won't worry about those until after I get this diagonal done. So I'll keep going with these symbols and fill in this little section. And then I can pick up these threads that are already threaded and go upward with this diagonal, downward with that. So that's a diagonal method. If you like systematic and don't want to miss any colors, if you're looking carefully, that would be a method for you. I probably wouldn't do it on this, but as I've shown here, works perfectly for this. Okay, how about another technique? This one is called the snake method. I've learned this one by watching other people on YouTube. And in the snake method, I'm trying to look for a good spot to do it. Let's pick this. You take a 4x4, 6x6, 2x2 section, whatever. I'm going to do this 2x2, this little square here. That's 400 stitches, except this I'm not going to do. So the way the snake method works, it's even more systematic. So I'm going to take this very first symbol there, that red diagonal, and I'm going to thread and start that one. So that red diagonal, if I can find it in my thread there, is number 3811. So I'm going to try to look through here. I think it's that light blue. Yes. I've done enough of this that I'm recognizing the numbers now. So I'm going to do the fold in half method, 4 strands. So I'm going to pull out 2, and I do prefer to do them one at a time just to keep the knots from happening. There's our 2, and put the rest of this back. Always put it back immediately so that you don't, unless you know that you're working just a huge area of one color, then you can keep it out. But I've had plenty of times where I've left a thread out and then got distracted by things I had to do and came back and was like, what color is this sitting out here? So fold in half. I usually put my needle immediately once I pull it out into the fabric, so I always know where it is too. Fold in half, push it through, voila. So now we have our loop at the bottom and a little knot trying to form here. There we go. So now I had picked this corner down here, and the first one of this square is this color. So I'm going to start there. Move it around to the back, pull, 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 catch the loop, and now it's secure. So I will finish that first stitch. Now this is even more systematic, because the way you're supposed to, well, I say supposed to, you do whatever you want. But the way I've seen it done is, now I look across this first row, across this, I'm doing a 4 square area here. So I look across, I see no more of that red diagonal. So now I go to the second row, snaking back this way, looking for the next one. I see no more. Then I go this way. Oh, there's one. I'm going to park right there. I'm not going to stitch it in this method. I'm going to park it. and it'll be there waiting for when I do that row. So this is more of a row by row method, going this way and that way and that way and that way. So then I look at the next color is this dark brown, and this was one negative about this canvas, is that that color is different from that. And they put them next to each other so you can kind of compare them. But I find it a little bit easier to see the difference between the two on the pattern here. So you can kind of see, we're working in this corner, so you can kind of see the two different colors, that is different from those. So that color is 3766 is our next one. I may have to edit out the struggle of me looking through, trying to find it. But that time it was pretty easy. Not a whole lot of this color. So that's another reason I don't want to get them mixed up. And I'm gonna, sure, why not? I'll show you another little trick. If you have small areas and you don't want to do a long thread, you can just take one thread for the even number thing and fold it in half twice. So that's what I'm gonna do here. I'm just gonna take one, and I don't know why my phone is, I guess the grid maybe on this, it's just really struggling to keep focus because my hands are moving so much in front of it, it's not sure what to focus on. So I'm gonna fold it in half. Now we got two, and I'm gonna fold it in half again and line them up. And now we have four with the loop, but it's much shorter. So that's another one of my little tricks if I don't want to use a ton of floss for a small area. So I got a little fuzz left on the needle. So thread that end, and I got my loop. So we'll do this next stitch here. So we will start it the usual way, and I don't see myself doing this method very often, maybe on a counted cross stitch, because you're going to have so many threads hanging, doing it row by row. But you try out the different things and see what works and modify them a little bit. So we do that stitch. There we go. Now we look across. That's a different color, nothing there. So then we come back around and we see the one right below it. Now I could park it there, but I'm gonna find it really annoying to have all these hanging threads, and I can park on that third row next to this one. So part of the idea is if there is one stitched above it, then you go ahead and stitch it. If the square is empty above it, then you park it, but that's too many rules. I'm gonna go ahead and stitch this one. And maybe if you don't like parking, what you can do, because normally for that third row, I would just park it here, but you can do a combo. So instead of parking, I'm gonna go ahead and fill in this whole first square maybe. Do it square by square instead of line by line. So I can keep going with this color, kind of in my head doing the back and forth thing until I fill in all of them in this square, and then maybe park. So that's another thing you can try. So I can do all of these looking at this top area here. Stitch, stitch, stitch. We do the stitches. I need to make up a song. Now this, I swear it does get a little hard to tell. That's a different color than the one below it. So I'm kind of doing this systematic line by line in my head. And it looks like the next one after that will be here. But instead of just doing a row or two at a time, I'm doing the whole 10 by 10. Or 20 by 10, I should say, since I'm doing across two squares. And one of the reasons you would want to do across 2 or 3 is that you'll get more chances to use a color. If I just did one small square, I'd be switching colors like constantly. So it's good to pick a slightly bigger area. Okay. So then I could keep going with that. I'm going to go ahead and park though on this next row. You get the idea. But I could fill in all of these up until the next 10 by 10 section and park there. But this is kind of a short thread and you don't want to see that much boring stitching. So I'm going to park there. So then I take the next color in the row, which is this triangle. And I would do the same thing. I'd stitch that color, go across, look. Then I do that one, then that one, then that one, go across, then I do that one, that one, keep going, that one, and it's just away, then that one, and that one. Of course, you just kind of line by line, you see several of that triangle there, but I would stop right there because I'm doing this in this 4x4 section. I would not bleed over into that next section because then it would be tempting. Well, since I'm here, I'll do those, and you'll get yourself all lost. Now, I prefer to be lost when I'm stitching those colors and doing that, but I'm just trying to share what I've learned on these different techniques. So that's how you would do something more systematic if your brain works that way. And if you prefer that. Now I did almost a blending of some of those ideas with the part that I've already done here. So what I did is I picked a symbol starting this way and I would go across like this throughout this entire 10 by 10 row and doing all the stitches. And then I would choose the next color, but I kind of mentioned it before when I got to like this dark green and saw that there were just a couple down here because this was an object, this was a shell. I went ahead and snuck down and did those and then kept going. And same with this blue. So another method you can do is object by object, but sometimes it can be hard to see those objects within the confetti. So this wasn't very clear until I did enough different colors to actually see it starting to come out. It looked a lot more like this with all the weird symbols. So the starfish is now starting to come through. I could do the starfish. I could take that purple color and do all the different arms. I would start here, probably go that way, but then it's a long stretch back over here, so I would probably end my thread there and then pick it back up again to work these areas and over there. So you can also do that object by object. So when I get to the gnome's face here, that's what I'll be doing. I'll be doing kind of object or area by area. But I've never been able to do one completely color by color for the entire canvas. I get bored with one color, so I don't like to jump around quite that much. I like to have little sections done because what I can do, let's look at this starfish here with that dark blue color here is actually pretty light. That's a 402 because that starfish is kind of light colored. It's kind of got a reddish color there, so I'm probably looking for something reddish over here, and my mess just keeps getting worse. Oh boy, okay, that's kind of a pale brown. So I'm going to do 3 strands because I'll show you, I already had one cut in half here from when I worked on that color before. So for 3, if you've had a lot of practice, you can separate 3 and 3 and just pull your way down. Oop, and get it twisted in your parked threads and end up with a mess here. Okay. There we go. And now I have 2 sections of 3. So I'll put this other one back for later. And even though I separated that way, I don't like to keep them twisted like that because the coverage isn't as good. So I will still separate them. So that's why I typically do the pulling for everything. But I was just showing you what can happen if you do it the other way. But I like to have a smooth look to my threads, so I will separate them and put them back together, and you see it's much more smooth without that twist in there. So why I'm switching gears now and going over to that starfish is because, get that in neat, once you get an area worked, it's much easier to start thread. So I'm going to start, here's the top of that color. There's our first stitch of that color right here. So I'm going to see where that is. I'm going to flip it over to the back, and I'm going to weave my thread through some of these stitches that are already done and start it that way. So I'm just pulling. That's why I use 3 instead of 4, because I have a way to secure it. And if I come up with a scraggly, and I will trim it. So now that way I'm using 3 instead of 4, so the bulk isn't there. And sometimes I'll even switch directions or loop it a little bit just to make sure that it's secure. And then I'll start my first stitch. So that's a lot of reason why I like whole areas to be done. And now it's getting a little harder to find those holes because I have so much thread already in them. So it's a little bit harder to push through all those other layers of thread that I've already stitched. But we'll just struggle a little bit. There we go on camera. And just work our way down. Here. And here. There we go. So 3 is indeed better than 4 for the ease in stitching, or the ease in pulling the stitches through, I should say, without that much bulk. But for starting, especially in an area where you don't have anything to secure it to, doing the 4 folded in half works better. So that's why it's a mix of both. So that way you have a little bit less bulk on the ones that you do 3 for, and yet you have ease in securing the threads the other way. So I'm going to do this more object by object is how I would call this. So you pick a color or an object that you can see and you complete it, choosing the color based on that particular object, in this case our starfish. So this is what I tend to do more often for stamped. But with this particular one, it was really, really hard through here to see too many objects. And this shows up better because I did that red color already. It wasn't so clear until I got that red color. So sometimes you can do a mix of different techniques until you can make something out and say, oh, I see it now, and can work on it. So that's kind of what I've done here. It's like, oh, I see the starfish. So I picked a color to work on, and it turned out to be this red that I saw several stitches in one area. And I was able to then make it out. So this video is already probably way too long. I know some people like long videos and just like to listen to them, so hopefully you got something out of this. And I showed you various ways that you can tackle one of these high confetti ones, but you typically see the high confetti in the budget brands, the Huacans, the Yishu's, Jingli, I think is another brand. They come in the clear plastic bags and look like this with these symbols. And I think I'll stop there with this tutorial. You get the idea. So you can either work area to area, you can kind of, like I did here, row to row, with 10 by 10 rows, and you can even count how many stitches you've done because each one of these is 100. So there's 4, 5, 6. I've got about six or 700, and I didn't even count all these. Or you can do color by color in an area. You can do diagonals, you can do squares going back and forth, more systematic if you prefer that. Lots of different ways, and just change the rules up to what works for you. So I don't like the row by row and parking after each individual row. I tend to, because these threads do get caught and in your way. So when I get off of this video, I'm going to go actually finish up all those hanging threads and secure them. So I'm going to work this color and finish this little section, and then I will finish these probably without doing the diagonal. I'll just kind of work along, and these two as well. But just try out different ways and see what works for you. But know that it is possible to get that confetti done when it looks like that. You just take it one step at a time, one color at a time, and especially for the 11 count, try doing the 4, folding in half to secure for a while until you have enough back there that you can do 3 to secure on the back at the start. And I think that's all I had in my pile over here to cover. So diagonal, probably better on high detail counted cross stitch. That's probably at least 60 colors, I think, of green in this little area there. Let's see. Here's, nope. I think that's all I brought. I thought I had my unicorn where I'm working area by color, because that one's a bit simpler. So maybe we can take a look again at this one and how I would tackle this one. This one isn't quite as confetti heavy, and I can see some of the different elements. So I could stitch the bird first if I wanted to, and then go for the flowers and maybe save the background for last. Or if I wanted, I could start at the top and do something a little more systematic. But since I can see the individual elements on this one, I can see the branch through here, I'd probably start with the bird on that one just because it would be cool. And my first color I would pick would be this green one because it's easy to see and there's a lot of it. So 14 count would take a little bit longer to use up that thread, but I bet I can do all of that with one thread. And then I go back and pick up this red circle and I do all of those, and then of course the blue there, and I'd probably be able to start making out a bird pretty well. And some of these smaller areas I might save till later, especially that eye. I might just keep going with the colors that I see the most and kind of fill in some areas, and then these smaller spots I would do at the end by securing. Now some people say it's better to do these small spots first because you can see them right now much easier than you could if you filled this in with a lot of other stitches. So that's another way you can do it, is jump around and do all these, kind of jumping like I showed, sometimes tucking under the threads beneath to fill all those in first, and then as you stitch the rest of it, you're covering up your little areas on the back where you stretched from one to another. But all of this is based on using Ida cloth, which is what stamped cross stitches are done with. It's thick. You're going to fill in the rest of the area. You won't see what's going on in the back. But if you're doing counted cross stitch with this looser weave, this is still pretty thick, but you can see sometimes what's going on in the back. Here it's a little more see-through, but especially linen, and so you don't want to stretch across a bunch because you will see it, and you don't want to find out after you did all that work and you go to frame it, because it will have like a white backing on the framing. I'm getting my part threads mixed up and everything. Then you wouldn't want to do that method. Now I do have like some of my Christmas ornaments here. Let's see, I haven't done much on this one, but because these holes are so big, you can see it's see-through, you wouldn't want to stretch too far on this one because those threads will show. Even if you cover it up over here, some of these areas in the background and stuff, those threads will show. So you don't want to cover or carry over the back on some things. So you'll figure it out over time as you work on different things, but I'm gonna let you go here, and hopefully you got a few different ideas of how to tackle some of this high confetti stuff, because you can, when you first look at it, it can be a little bit of, oh no, what do I do? Where do I start? When you can't see the individual things coming through like on this one. So let me know if any of this worked for you. If you want to see something even more basic, let me know. And I will probably do more series of tutorials. I had one person actually email me that they wanted to use some of my videos in a class. I will respond to you today if you are watching this one. That yes, certainly. I do these for free. I do these for fun. So if you want to share my videos in classes you're teaching or use parts of them, go for it. I do this just to share information. I'm not trying to copyright anything or worry about any of that. Just have fun and craft, and I'll catch you next time.